It was a warm and peaceful morning, the kind of day that made the whole neighborhood feel gentle and alive. Sunlight filtered softly through the leaves of tall trees that lined the sidewalks, and a calm breeze carried the faint scent of fresh grass. Officer Daniel parked his patrol car near Willow Park, where families often gathered to walk, jog, and enjoy the early daylight. He opened the passenger door, and his loyal K9 partner, Rex, jumped out with practiced ease. Rex was a strong, intelligent German shepherd with deep brown eyes that always seemed to understand more than any ordinary dog. He was trained for search and rescue, crowd assistance, and emergency response skills that made him one of the most trusted police dogs in the district. Every morning, Daniel and Rex followed the same routine: a walk around the park, a quick assessment of the area, and then patrolling nearby streets. But Daniel couldn't shake a strange feeling in his chest that morning. Rex kept pausing, lifting his head, sniffing the air, then walking forward again, almost as if he was following a scent that only he could detect. As they began walking along the paved path, people greeted the officer and smiled at Rex, who usually responded with calm tail wags. But today, Rex barely acknowledged anyone. His ears stayed pricked, and his eyes scanned the area with unusual intensity. Daniel noticed it immediately. He knew Rex better than anyone. This wasn't nerves, nor was it distraction. Rex was sensing something Daniel couldn't see. Still, the officer assumed it might just be a distant sound or the scent of another animal. But Rex acted with a different kind of alertness today, almost like an invisible thread was pulling him towards something important. Halfway down the path, Daniel spotted a young woman walking slowly along the opposite side of the park. She moved with a gentle pace, one hand resting protectively on her belly. Her name was Emily, though Daniel didn't know that yet. She was 8 months pregnant, and her doctor had advised her to take peaceful morning walks to relax her muscles and help her sleep better. She looked tired but calm, taking steady breaths as she admired the bright morning sky. The soft sunlight glowed against her pale skin, and her long hair swayed lightly in the breeze as she tried to enjoy a moment of peace before another busy day began. In her heart, she believed nothing could go wrong in such a quiet, safe place. But the moment Rex's eyes landed on her, something inside the dog shifted sharply. His muscles tensed, his nostrils flared, his tail stiffened, and then, without warning, he let out a sudden, deep bark that echoed through the park like a warning siren. Daniel jumped slightly. Rex never barked without reason. Before the officer could react, Rex barked again, even louder this time, his entire body tightening as he stared directly at the pregnant woman. Daniel tugged the leash, confused and surprised. Rex had never acted aggressively toward anyone, especially not an innocent passerby. But the dog didn't stop. He pulled harder, nearly dragging Daniel forward as he tried to run toward her. People in the park stopped walking and turned their heads, startled by the sudden noise. Some parents pulled their children closer. A few joggers slowed to watch what was happening. Everyone knew Rex as a calm and controlled canine, so seeing him bark with such desperation sent a wave of confusion across the area. Daniel tried to calm him, whispering commands he had used for years, commands Rex always obeyed. But not today. Rex's barking only grew more frantic, echoing across the bright open field. It wasn't aggressive barking. There was no growl, no attempt to attack. It was warning, urgent, desperate, almost like someone shouting for help. Emily froze when she heard the barking. She pressed a hand over her stomach, feeling her baby shift inside. For a moment, fear washed over her. She had never been this close to a police dog before, especially one acting so loudly. Rex's eyes locked onto her with an expression she couldn't understand, an expression that almost felt like pleading. She stepped back carefully, not wanting to cause trouble, but the dog's barking only grew louder. Her heart raced as she wondered what was wrong. She looked around at the other park visitors, hoping for reassurance, but many of them seemed just as confused as she was. Daniel approached Emily, apologizing quickly, trying to pull Rex away. But the dog refused to move. He planted his paws firmly into the ground and pulled again in her direction, barking until his chest heaved with effort. Daniel felt embarrassed, frustrated, and concerned all at once. He knew something about Rex's reaction wasn't normal, but he had no proof of danger. Still, deep down, he sensed the urgency in Rex's cries. They weren't random. They weren't disobedience. Something was wrong, but he couldn't see it, couldn't guess it, couldn't understand what Rex was desperately trying to tell him. Emily tried to assure him she was okay. She smiled politely, even though her voice trembled slightly, and told the officer she felt completely fine, just a bit surprised by the sudden commotion. She had felt small kicks from the baby earlier and assumed everything was normal. She didn't want to make a scene or attract unwanted attention. She gently rubbed her belly and tried to continue walking, but Rex's barking became even more intense as if he sensed she was moving away from safety. A small crowd began to form. Some people whispered. Some shook their heads, believing the dog was simply having a strange moment. Others recorded the incident on their phones, thinking it might be another aggressive police dog story. Daniel felt the pressure rising. He had to act quickly. He pulled Rex back with more force than usual, apologizing again to Emily, who gave one last nervous smile before she continued her slow walk toward the parking lot. Rex cried out a heartbreaking sound, a sound Daniel had never heard from him before. But the officer had no choice. He had to follow procedure. Still, as they walked away from the scene, Daniel could feel Rex's trembling, could hear the deep, frustrated whimpers coming from the dog who never whimpered. Something was wrong, something Rex understood, but he didn't. He just didn't know that on this peaceful morning, they had already stepped into the beginning of a life-changing event. One that would soon reveal that Rex's desperate barking had been a warning no one should have ignored. As Emily continued her slow walk down the sunny park path, trying her best to calm her racing heart, Officer Daniel struggled to pull Rex in the opposite direction. But Rex refused to cooperate in a way Daniel had never seen before. The powerful canine dug his claws into the ground, resisting with every muscle in his body, twisting his neck and pulling on the leash so hard that Daniel had to use both hands to control him. It was shocking because Rex was a highly trained service dog who never disobeyed commands, never panicked, and never barked without purpose. But now, as the bright morning light poured over the green fields of Willow Park, Rex looked like a creature possessed by instinct and urgency, his chest rising rapidly, his eyes constantly locked on Emily as if she carried something invisible and dangerous inside her. Daniel kept whispering calming commands, telling him to heel, to sit, to stay, yet Rex ignored everything, barking and whining with an intensity that made several people nearby stop in their tracks. Even the birds perched on the park benches flew away startled by the noise. A young couple walking their baby in a stroller stared with wide eyes, unsure whether to keep watching or leave the area. Elderly joggers paused mid-step, whispering amongst themselves about the strange behavior of the normally gentle police dog. Emily felt all eyes on her and tried her best to appear calm, but deep inside, she felt a strange heaviness spreading across her chest. It wasn't fear of the dog, something about Rex's expression had touched her heart in a way she couldn't explain. His eyes didn't look violent or angry. Instead, they looked desperate, almost pleading, as if he wanted to speak, but his only language was barking. She placed her hand over her belly again, rubbing slowly to reassure the little life growing inside her. "It's okay, baby," she murmured softly, though she wasn't sure who she was comforting more, herself or the child she carried. She turned to walk away, hoping to ease the tension around her. But the moment she took 2 steps forward, Rex let out a bark so sharp and loud that even Daniel flinched. The bark wasn't hostile, it was almost terrified. Officer Daniel felt a knot tightening in his stomach. He knew Rex better than he knew most people, and this wasn't the behavior of a dog acting out or overreacting to a random scent. This was the behavior of a dog sensing danger, real danger. Daniel had seen Rex react similarly only once before, during a search and rescue mission when they were trying to locate an elderly man lost in the woods. Rex had behaved in the same desperate way, pulling Daniel through thick bushes and brambles until they found the missing man collapse near a riverbank moments before hypothermia could take his life. That day, Rex's frantic reaction had saved someone's life. Today, it felt eerily similar, But this time there was no obvious emergency, no clear threat, no logical explanation. Daniel tried to follow the rules, but his instincts whispered that he should trust Rex. Something was very wrong. Even though nothing looked out of place, a small group of bystanders approached, asking the officer if the dog was dangerous or sick. One man warned Emily to keep her distance, saying police dogs could sometimes behave unpredictably. Another woman pulled out her phone and began recording, thinking it might be a dramatic moment worth sharing online. Daniel felt the pressure of the crowd growing heavier on his shoulders, and even though he tried to stay professional, he couldn't shake the uneasiness creeping through him. He apologized again to Emily, who stood quietly with one hand on her belly, her expression worried yet composed. She assured him she was fine, but her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the strange connection she felt with the dog who kept crying out for her attention. She wondered if maybe she looked weaker today, more pale, or more tired, but she ignored the thought, convincing herself it was only the normal exhaustion of late pregnancy. As she turned away once more, Rex pulled violently in her direction, nearly wrenching the leash from Daniel's grasp. The officer had to wrap the leash twice around his hand to hold Rex back. Rex's paws scraped against the pavement so forcefully that they made a rough skidding sound, and his entire body leaned forward so intensely that his front legs trembled with effort. A nervous mother nearby clutched her toddler's hand and hurried away, clearly misunderstanding the situation. Daniel tried again to kneel beside Rex, hoping to check if the dog was in pain or reacting to something physical, but Rex wouldn't even sit. He twisted his head over his shoulder, eyes fixed on Emily with such raw urgency that Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine. The officer placed a hand gently on Rex's side, trying to understand the source of the panic, but Rex wasn't panicking. He was warning. He was pleading. He was trying to tell them something his instincts understood long before human eyes could see any danger. Emily, trying to shake off the lingering fear, slowly resumed walking toward the parking lot. The path stretched ahead of her, lined with blossoming flowers and freshly cut grass, but suddenly the peaceful scenery felt different, heavier, as if the bright sunlight hid something she didn't yet know. Her legs felt slightly heavier with each step, though she shrugged it off, blaming the hot day or the weight of her pregnancy. But Rex knew. Rex sensed something hidden, something changing inside her body, something only his powerful senses could detect. An internal warning, a shift, a scent that spelled danger. Daniel finally made the difficult decision to turn away with Rex, even though the dog resisted every inch of the way. As he pulled Rex down another path, the dog let out heartbreaking cries, long, painful whimpers that echoed across the open field like the sound of a soul begging for someone to listen. People around them seemed uncertain, confused, and shaken, but the moment passed as quickly as it had come. Life in the park resumed, joggers returned to their routines, and children continued playing. But something in the air had changed. An invisible warning had been given, a message had been lost, and the only creature who understood it was being pulled away helplessly. As Emily disappeared around the curve of the path, holding her belly protectively, Rex continued crying, his heart pounding with fear, his instincts screaming that something terrible was about to happen. Officer Daniel glanced back one last time, watching Emily walk farther and farther away, completely unaware that she was stepping closer to danger with every peaceful step she took. And Rex, unable to speak the language humans needed to hear, could only bark and hope someone listened before it was too late. As the bright morning continued spreading warmth across Willow Park, Emily tried to steady her breathing as she walked farther down the path, hoping distance would help her forget the desperate barking behind her. But inside her chest, something felt strangely unsettled, as though an invisible shadow was following her despite the sunshine. She pressed a hand to her belly, whispering softly to her baby, assuring herself that everything was fine, that she was only shaken because anyone would feel anxious seeing a police dog react so intensely. But the uneasy feeling didn't disappear. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel dragged Rex in the opposite direction, though it felt less like walking and more like trying to hold back a storm. Every few steps, Rex planted his paws firmly on the ground and twisted his head back toward the direction Emily had gone, whining louder each time, his tail stiff, his body tense, and his breathing rapid. Daniel had never seen Rex behave like this, not in emergencies, not in disasters, not even during dangerous rescue missions, and the unfamiliar behavior ate away at his nerves. He wanted to trust Rex, but the crowd, the confusion, the need to maintain control all pulled him in another direction. He felt torn between his duty and his instincts, unsure which voice to trust. Behind them, people slowly began returning to their normal activities, but not without lingering glances. Some whispered, wondering aloud if police dogs sometimes lost control or if Rex had caught the scent of something alarming. A middle-aged man pacing nearby said he had never seen a canine act so panicked. Another insisted the dog must have sensed a criminal or threat. No one considered that Rex's cries were a warning for something no human eye could detect. A few teenagers, amused by the commotion, replayed the videos they had taken on their phones, laughing about how dramatic it all looked. Yet, in their recordings, Rex's voice didn't sound comical, it sounded heartbreaking, like a creature trapped between his knowledge and his inability to communicate it. Even the jogger who had paused earlier felt a strange concern, watching Rex being led away like a prisoner begging for help. But as time passed, most people dismissed the scene, shrugging it off as an odd experience, because humans often ignore signs they don't understand. Emily arrived near the row of benches by the park's central fountain, a place she usually enjoyed sitting at while watching families play. But the moment she sat down, she felt a strange dull ache beneath her ribs. It wasn't sharp enough to alarm her, but it wasn't normal either. She placed both hands on her belly, whispering to her unborn child, calling them little one like she always did. She felt another kick, but this one was softer, weaker, lacking the playful energy she had felt earlier that morning. A small frown formed on her face. She tried to recall whether she had been feeling these strange sensations throughout the past week. She wondered if she should call her doctor, but she shook her head gently, reminding herself that pregnancy came with hundreds of small discomforts. She couldn't run to the hospital every time something felt unusual. She reminded herself that she had a doctor's appointment scheduled in 2 days. Everything would be checked then. Still, a tiny bead of worrying grew in her heart, small, but undeniable. Not far away. Daniel finally stopped walking and faced Rex, who was panting heavily, eyes darting anxiously toward the direction they had come from. Daniel knelt down and held Rex's face gently between his hands, something he rarely did because Rex never needed reassurance like this. "What is it, buddy?" Daniel whispered, his voice heavy with guilt. Rex let out a soft whimper, the kind that sounded almost like a cry, and pushed his nose against Daniel's chest as if trying to push the message into his heart. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, trying to understand what Rex knew, wishing he could speak even one word of the language the dog seemed to be shouting. He remembered all the training, all the missions, all the lives Rex had helped save, and he wondered whether he had just ignored something important, something that could cost someone dearly. The thought clung to him like a weight he couldn't shake off. As Emily stood again and continued toward the parking area, she walked slower this time, the uneasy ache in her abdomen growing slightly stronger. The park felt less bright now, even though the sun was still shining, and every step felt heavier than the last. She reached the small wooden bridge that crossed over a shallow decorative pond, and for a moment she stopped, placing both hands on the railing as a wave of dizziness washed over her. It passed quickly, but it left her breathless and confused. She silently scolded herself, blaming dehydration or fatigue, promising she would rest once she got home. She didn't know that inside her body, silent changes were unfolding, changes that even she couldn't feel in full yet. Changes that Rex had sensed long before the symptoms appeared. Back on the path, Rex suddenly jerked his head upward again, ears straightening sharply, tail raising in alarm. He let out another loud bark and tried once more to pull away from Daniel. This time, Daniel didn't pull him back immediately. Instead, he tightened his grip and looked around, trying to figure out what triggered Rex again. But the park looked normal, families chatting, children playing, People walking their dogs, sunlight glistening on the pond. Nothing looked wrong, yet Rex growled softly, not in aggression, but with frustration, pacing in circles, nose twitching rapidly as if picking up the same scent he had smelled near Emily earlier. Daniel felt a cold discomfort settle deep in his stomach. He knew he couldn't return to the woman without a clear reason that would cause panic, but he also felt something pulling him to follow Rex's instincts. A heavy, painful uncertainty filled his chest as he watched Rex's desperate behavior continue. A few minutes later, life in the park returned to distant chatter and laughter. Emily crossed the final stretch of the path with slow steps, unaware that Rex's warnings were not just instinct, they were a countdown. The ache inside her had grown stronger, though she kept convincing herself it was nothing serious. Behind her, Rex continued pacing anxiously in circles, whining softly, exhausted from trying to warn the humans who didn't understand. And in that bright, peaceful morning, surrounded by sunshine and calmness, every person believed the danger had passed, not knowing that the real danger was silently moving closer with every single step Emily took. As Emily reached the final stretch of the park's pathway, the sunlight felt warmer and heavier on her skin, almost as if the bright day itself was weighing down on her shoulders. She tried to keep her breathing steady, but the strange discomfort inside her belly had grown into a dull, pulsing ache that refused to fade. Her steps became slower, careful, and thoughtful, as though her body sensed something she couldn't understand. She whispered softly to her baby, telling them they would be home soon, telling them to stay strong, telling herself to stay calm. The trees around her swayed gently in the breeze, creating a peaceful picture, but the peace felt hollow now, thin and fragile like a shell ready to crack. She reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, but her hand trembled slightly, something she tried to ignore as she continued walking toward the parking lot. Her car parked under the shade of a large maple tree. She looked ahead at the car and told herself she only needed to walk a little more, just a few more steps, and then she could rest, hydrate, and lie down until the ache passed. But the moment she stepped off the small wooden bridge, a sharp pain stabbed through her lower abdomen with such force that she gasped and instinctively grabbed the railing beside her. Her knees buckled, and her breath escaped in a broken exhale that sent panic racing up her spine. She tried to straighten herself, tried to tell her body to hold on, tried to whisper soothing words to her baby, but the pain only deepened, spreading through her like a wave of fire, moving under her skin. She let out a weak cry and clutched her belly tightly, hoping it was just a sudden cramp, maybe the baby shifting into a new position, but something about this pain felt different, frightening, and wrong. The ground beneath her seemed to sway, and her vision blurred around the edges. She blinked rapidly, struggling to stay focused, but the bright sunlight only made the dizziness worse. She stumbled forward a step, trying desperately to keep her balance, but another violent surge of pain hit her, stronger than the first, and she collapsed to her knees on the pavement, her fingers clawing at the ground as she fought to breathe. A jogger passing by froze in shock and rushed toward her, calling her name even though he didn't know it. He knelt down beside her, asking if she was okay, but Emily couldn't answer. She could only shake her head slightly as she fought against the pain that now pulsed in rapid, terrifying waves. She felt hot sweat forming on her forehead, running down her temples, and her breathing came in short, desperate gasps. The jogger shouted for help, waving frantically at other people in the park. A woman pushing a stroller ran over, pulling out her phone and dialing emergency services immediately, her hands shaking. More people gathered around Emily, but everyone felt helpless. One woman offered water, another tried to shade her from the sun, and the jogger placed a steadying hand on her back, trying to keep her calm. Emily tried to speak, to say she felt dizzy, to say something was wrong, to explain the horrible pressure inside her stomach, but the words wouldn't come. Her heart thumped wildly in her chest, and fear spread through her like a cold shadow. Meanwhile, on the other side of the park, Rex suddenly lifted his head sharply. His ears shot up, his entire body stiffened, and he let out a deep, chilling bark that made Officer Daniel's heart stop for a moment. The dog pulled on the leash again, far more violently than before, as if he had just sensed something breaking, something urgent, something he had been trying to warn them about. Daniel felt a jolt of panic explode inside him. He had ignored Rex once, but the dog's sudden reaction now felt too real to ignore. Without thinking twice, he loosened his grip, and Rex bolted toward the direction Emily had gone earlier. Daniel stumbled forward, shouting Rex's name, but he didn't attempt to stop him. Something inside Daniel told him this was no coincidence. Rex was running toward danger, not away from it. When Daniel caught up and reached the bend near the parking lot, he saw the small crowd gathered around someone on the ground. His stomach twisted painfully as he sprinted forward, with Rex leading the way. When he pushed through the people, he saw Emily lying half collapsed on the pavement, gripping her belly tightly, her face pale and slick with sweat. Rex let out a deep whine and circled her, sniffing rapidly, confirming everything he had sensed earlier. Daniel felt his heart drop. Rex had been right all along. Something was terribly wrong. Within minutes, the sound of an approaching ambulance filled the air, its siren slicing through the sunny morning like a warning bell. Paramedics rushed in with medical bags and equipment, kneeling beside Emily, asking her questions she could barely answer. They checked her pulse, her breathing, and the baby's signs, and their expression shifted from calm professionalism to quiet urgency. One of the paramedics exchanged a grave look with his partner and whispered the words possible placental abruption, a term Emily didn't understand, but Daniel immediately recognized from past emergency cases. It was a dangerous condition, something that could happen suddenly and without warning, causing internal bleeding that put both the mother and baby at severe risk. Time was everything. Seconds mattered. Minutes could mean life or death. And here she was, lying on the pavement, her body giving silent, terrifying signals that she was losing that precious time. The paramedics worked quickly, lifting her onto a stretcher as she groaned in pain, gripping the side rails as though holding onto the last thread of control she had. Daniel stepped back to give them space, but Rex stayed close, whining softly as he paced in tight circles, his eyes filled with a heartbreaking mixture of fear and urgency. People watched with anxious faces, whispering prayers, hoping for a miracle. As the paramedics prepared to load Emily into the ambulance, Daniel couldn't help replaying the entire morning in his mind, the barking, the warnings, the ignored pleas. He felt a deep ache in his chest, a guilt that weighed heavily on his heart. Rex had known, Rex had tried, but no one had listened. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and the siren wailed as it sped away, carrying Emily toward the hospital, toward a fight she never expected to face on what began as just another beautiful morning. Daniel watched it disappear down the road, his heart heavy with fear and regret, while Rex stood beside him, trembling lightly as if his own heart had broken with the woman he had tried to save. As the ambulance carrying Emily raced toward the hospital, with its sirens crying through the air, Officer Daniel stood frozen at the edge of the parking lot, unable to shake the heavy weight that pressed against his chest. His heart pounded so loudly that he could hear it in his ears, drowning out the soft noises of the park behind him. Next to him stood Rex, trembling lightly, pacing back and forth in tight, fast circles, his claws tapping anxiously against the concrete. Rex wasn't reacting like a dog relieved that help had arrived. He was reacting like a creature who knew danger hadn't passed yet, who understood something deeper and more urgent than anyone else around. Daniel knelt beside him and placed a trembling hand gently on the dog's neck. He whispered, "You knew, didn't you? You tried to tell us." The words barely left his lips before a wave of guilt washed through him, stronger than anything he had ever felt. Rex whined in response, lowering his head and nudging Daniel's hand with a mixture of sadness and pleading, as though begging to be understood now, even if it was too late for the moment that had already passed. The park began returning to its usual quiet rhythm, yet it felt haunted by the moment that had just unfolded. People walked away slowly, whispering among themselves, shaken by how quickly a peaceful morning had turned into a life-or-death emergency. A few individuals who had recorded the earlier chaos now stared at their phones, looking at the footage of Rex barking at Emily, realizing the scene wasn't aggressive, it was desperate. Not one person felt proud for ignoring the dog's cries. Some seemed ashamed, others seemed thoughtful, but all of them walked away with a lingering sense that they had witnessed something extraordinary, an animal that sensed danger long before humans understood it. Daniel led Rex back toward the patrol car, but the dog resisted every step. His body angled toward the direction where the ambulance had disappeared. Normally, Rex would walk obediently beside him, but now Rex tugged against the leash with small, urgent pulls, begging to follow the woman he had been trying to protect. Daniel had no choice but to stop walking again. He crouched down in front of Rex and looked into his deep, brown eyes filled with intelligence, instinct, and something almost human in emotion. "I should have trusted you," Daniel whispered softly, the words thick with pain. "You were trying to save her, and I didn't see it." Rex sat down slowly, letting out a long, aching sigh that felt too heavy to come from an animal. It was the sound of defeat, the sound of a creature who had done everything in his power, but had been held back by the limits of a world that didn't speak his language. A few minutes later, Daniel reached for his radio and contacted dispatch, requesting permission to drive to the hospital to check on the emergency involving the pregnant woman. His voice was steady, but inside he felt like a storm was brewing: fear, guilt, worrying, and an overwhelming urge to make things right. Dispatch approved the request, noting that the situation sounded serious enough to justify follow-up. Daniel opened the passenger door for Rex, who jumped in immediately, settling down with his head resting tensely on the edge of the seat. As Daniel drove out of the park, every red light felt longer than usual. Every passing second felt like a grain of sand slipping away in an hourglass he wished he could flip over. He kept glancing at Rex, who kept staring out the window, ears slightly raised, body tense, as though listening for a sound that humans could not hear. At the hospital, the emergency parking area buzzed with activity. Nurses pushing stretchers, doctors rushing into rooms, alarms beeping from somewhere inside the building. Daniel approached the reception desk, explained the situation, and was directed toward the maternity emergency unit. He wasn't allowed inside, but he stood near the hallway entrance, gripping the railing as he listened to the chaotic footsteps and voices coming from behind the doors. Rex sat beside him, trembling slightly, sniffing the air with rapid motions, sensing the fear and urgency inside. Moments later, the paramedic who had attended to Emily rushed out for additional supplies. Daniel stopped him and asked desperately, "How is she? Is she okay?" The paramedic wiped sweat from his forehead and said in a rushed voice that the situation was critical. The mother was losing significant blood internally, and the baby's oxygen levels were dropping quickly. They were preparing for an emergency operation. Every second counted. When Daniel heard the words "every second," his heart felt like it cracked open. Rex's earlier barking replayed in his mind like a haunting echo. Rex had tried to warn them hours before the symptoms appeared. If only Daniel had acted sooner. If only he had trusted his partner. He looked down at Rex again, who now sat with his ears low and his eyes filled with worrying, sensing the tension in the air. The paramedic glanced at Rex and said quietly, "Your dog. He reacted earlier, didn't he?" Daniel nodded slowly, and the paramedic gave a thoughtful, almost amazed expression. "Some dogs can smell hormonal or chemical changes. Some can even detect internal bleeding before it's obvious. Maybe he sensed it." The words felt like a punch to the chest. Rex wasn't reacting randomly. He had sensed the early stages of a life-threatening condition long before it became visible. He had tried to save her. Minutes felt like hours as Daniel waited, pacing slowly along the hallway, while Rex remained seated close by, watching every door, every nurse, every sign of movement as though hoping for a miracle. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Emily, the young woman who had walked so peacefully that morning, thinking it would be a normal day. He couldn't stop thinking about the child she carried, the life that had not even taken its first breath yet. And he couldn't stop thinking about how close they came to tragedy, how dangerously close, because humans didn't trust the instincts of an animal who understood more than they did. A nurse eventually approached, her expression tired but calmer than before. She gave Daniel a small nod. "She's in surgery," she said softly. The doctors are doing everything they can. It's good she got here in time. Daniel let out a long, shaky breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Rex leaned gently against his leg, as if reminding him that the fight wasn't over yet, but hope still remained. And in that hallway, with the bright fluorescent lights humming softly above them, Daniel finally understood the full truth. Rex wasn't just a police dog. He was a guardian, one who had seen danger before anyone else. One who had tried to save 2 lives with nothing but instinct and voice. One who had barked for help long before the world realized someone needed it. The hours that followed were some of the longest and most agonizing moments of Officer Daniel's life. He sat in the waiting area of the maternity emergency unit, with Rex lying quietly at his feet. The usually confident K9 now pressed close to Daniel's leg, as though he feared that moving even an inch would somehow break the fragile line of hope connecting him to Emily and her unborn child. The hospital lights hummed softly above them. The hallways echoed with hurried footsteps and muffled conversations, and every passing minute tightened the invisible knot in Daniel's chest. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor, replaying the entire day again and again in his mind. The barking, the warnings, the moment he pulled Rex away, the way Emily had walked with a hand on her belly, trying to act strong despite the quiet signs her body had been trying to give. Daniel's stomach twisted painfully with guilt, and each time he looked at Rex, who watched the doors intently with wide, anxious eyes, the guilt only deepened because he finally understood the truth. Rex had been trying to save her long before anyone else knew she needed saving. Time slipped by slowly, and though people came and went from the waiting room, Daniel and Rex stayed exactly where they were, united by a sense of responsibility and fear. A nurse approached at one point to offer water, but Daniel barely took a sip, and Rex refused the small bowl she placed on the floor. It was as if both of them were holding their breath, waiting for the outcome that could change everything. Daniel found himself whispering apologies to Rex, soft, broken words that came from a place of deep regret, telling him that next time he would listen, that he was sorry for doubting him, that he understood now how powerful his partner's instincts were. Rex responded by gently placing his head on Daniel's knee, offering silent forgiveness the way only loyal animals could, without judgment, without anger, simply with love. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, the double doors to the emergency operating area opened, and a doctor wearing scrubs stepped out. His expression was tired, but not grim, and Daniel felt his heart leap with cautious hope. He stood instantly, and Rex rose with him, tail still and ears pointed forward. The doctor walked closer and said in a calm, warm voice, "She's stable." Both she and the baby made it. Daniel felt his knees weaken with relief, and he had to steady himself by placing a hand on the nearby chair. Rex let out a soft whine, almost like a cry of happiness. The doctor continued, explaining that Emily had indeed suffered a severe placental abruption, and if she had arrived even 15 or 20 minutes later, the outcome could have been catastrophic. They had performed an emergency C-section, and the baby was now in the neonatal care unit, breathing on her own, a tiny, but strong little girl who seemed determined to survive despite everything. Daniel exhaled shakily and looked down at Rex, who met his eyes with a sense of knowing, as if saying, "I told you." The doctor asked how they had known to bring Emily in so quickly, and when Daniel explained what had happened in the park, Rex's frantic barking, the warning everyone had misunderstood, and the dog's earlier intuition, the doctor nodded thoughtfully and said that some highly trained K9 South could detect hormonal shifts or early internal bleeding even before symptoms were obvious. It wasn't common, but it wasn't impossible. "Your dog probably saved lives today," the doctor said, giving Rex a gentle pat before walking away. Daniel felt a surge of emotion rise in his chest: pride, gratitude, relief, and he crouched down to hug Rex tightly, whispering, "You saved them. You really saved them." 2 days later, after Emily had recovered enough to be moved to a regular hospital room, Daniel returned to visit her, and this time, he brought Rex with him, not as a police dog on duty, but as the hero who had changed the course of her life. When they entered her room, Emily was sitting up in bed, holding her newborn daughter wrapped in a soft pink blanket. Her face was still pale, but glowing with a peacefulness that only a mother who had survived something terrifying could carry. When she saw Rex, her eyes immediately filled with tears. She reached out a trembling hand, and Rex approached her slowly, gently, as if he knew she was fragile. He placed his head softly on the edge of her bed, and Emily stroked his fur with such tenderness that even Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. You knew," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. "You were trying to warn me. You tried to save us, and I didn't understand." She leaned forward and kissed the top of Rex's head, tears streaming down her cheeks. Emily then held up her baby girl for Daniel and Rex to see. "This is Lily," she said softly. "She's here because of you both. Especially him." The newborn made a tiny sound, her little fingers curling in the air, and Rex sniffed her gently, almost protectively. Emily smiled through her tears and continued, "He's her first guardian angel." The words hung in the air like something sacred, something powerful and true. Daniel felt a deep warmth spread through him, and he placed a gentle hand on Rex's back, feeling the dog breathe calmly and proudly, as if he fully understood the honor he had been given. In the days that followed, the story spread across the town. What had first looked like a police dog behaving aggressively turned out to be a story of extraordinary instinct and bravery. People who had been in the park that morning found themselves telling the tale differently now, with admiration instead of confusion, with gratitude instead of fear. Videos recorded earlier, once misunderstood, now showed a hero trying desperately to communicate danger. Soon, local news reached out to interview Emily and Daniel, and Rex became a symbol of loyalty, intuition, and the unspoken bond between humans and animals. But for Daniel, the real reward wasn't the attention, it was the knowledge that he would never again doubt the dog who stood beside him every day. And for Emily, every time she held little Lily in her arms, she remembered the sound of Rex's bark echoing through the park, an alarm she hadn't understood then, but one that had meant everything. She promised herself she would always tell her daughter the story of the courageous dog who saw danger before anyone else did, the dog who refused to give up, the dog whose love for life pushed through every barrier until he saved hers. And so, under the warm daylight that had witnessed everything from the warning to the collapse to the miracle, two families were forever connected by a moment that changed everything, and by the loyal heart of a canine who refused to stay silent when it mattered most.